Zebulun, Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command thee.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome to the Abracast. I'm your host, John Towers. Hey, I got the visual of the art, whatever, www.abracast.com. Check out the storefront, tarot cards, t-shirts, yada, yada, yada. Let's get going. Last week we did an episode called American Dystopia, where it was kind of setting the new, I don't know, like the new status quo for what it's like. America is not like it was 5 years ago. Certainly not like it was 10 years ago. So we just kind of wanted to take a look around and be like, what the fuck happened? And this is the way it is nowadays. So to kind of go along with that as like a companion piece, I wanted to kind of talk about the war in Ukraine, the Russo-Ukrainian War, whatever they're calling it. It's what you put in the easy bake oven. You open up the little box for World War III and you put it in there. And this is kind of where we are. I mentioned it last week about the application, Ukraine's application to NATO and the intrinsic trap they're in, where if they get accepted or whatever as an official member of NATO, we have to become engaged in a hot war with Russia. So I feel like whenever I think about this stuff, I feel like, what is it? Fucking the Nietzschean time loop. Like when I was a little kid, it was like at the very end of the Cold War. And I remember being just obsessed with it. I remember, doodling like mushroom clouds. Like it was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. There were movies about it. It was like that fucking TV. So, Damnation Alley, giant cockroaches, this kind of stuff. So I definitely have my eye on this now because here we are. It's kind of gone away since the 90s and now it's back. And, theoretically, the whole world should be structured around keeping us and Russia apart from each other. Like, don't fucking piss in my side of the pool and I won't fucking piss in your side of the pool. And like, that's it. But it seems like there are folks, a lot of them who are somehow in charge, who are just salivating at this idea of going to war with Russia. We're sending billions of dollars of aid and weapons to them. We're going to talk a lot about this, the pipeline that got sabotaged and who did it, and all this stuff. And I just feel like here we go again. So as a companion piece to last week's show, I kind of did want to just like, look, this is the state of the war in Russia, and we're going to start with Putin's speech. And as we go through this, I'm actually reading an Al Jazeera article that they kind of went through it and pulled out some stuff. And as we go through this, I want you guys to think about Dugin and the 3 episodes we did on the fourth political theory, which was based on Alexander Dugin. You can find it on the feature topic link, I believe, under history. Anyhow, it's important to note that Dugin's daughter just got car bombed. And everyone was like, oh, that was actually intended for Dugin. So there's more sabotage, and like no one has stepped up to take credit for that one either. So as we go through this, think of the fourth political theory, those 3 episodes that we did, and think about the way that Dugin has framed the fourth political theory as a war on modernity and our sort of role in that worldview. So Putin's speech on annexation, what exactly did he say? President Putin announced that 4 occupied regions of Ukraine would formally be incorporated into Mother Russia. President Putin announced the formal annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine on a speech on Friday. Putin and the leaders of the 4 regions signed treaties to annex Luhansk, whatever, these 4 things. I'm not going to subject you guys to this. A move which has been denounced as illegal by Ukraine and other Western powers. During a 37-minute long speech, Putin spoke about the breakup of the Soviet Union, Western colonial policy, nuclear weapons, and his view of Western morals. This is so fucking interesting. The quotes below have been translated into English from Russia. Defending our land. We will defend our land with all the powers and means at our disposal. In 91, at Blazova Forest, without asking the will of the common citizens, representatives of then party elites decided to destroy the USSR, and some people suddenly found themselves cut off from their motherland. This tore apart and dismembered our nation, becoming a national catastrophe. I admit that they did not fully understand what they were doing and what the consequences this would inevitably lead to in the end. But this is no longer important. There is no Soviet Union. The past cannot be brought back, and Russia today does not need it anymore. We are not striving for this. The battlefield, if you listen to the common knowledge, like experts, they say that this is what's driving Putin, is wanting to kind of reforge Russia. So here he's saying that's not what we're doing. We are not striving for this. The battlefield to which fate and history have called us in the battlefield for our people. The great historical Russia for future generations, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The message to Kyiv: I want the Kyiv authorities and their real masters in the West to hear me so that they remember this. People living in these 4 areas are becoming our citizens forever. Full stop. We call on the Kyiv regime to immediately end hostilities, end the war that they unleashed back in 2014, and return to the negotiating table. We are ready for this. But we will not discuss the choices of the people in these four previously Ukrainian areas that has been made. Russia will not betray them. So then he goes on to talk about the Nord Stream gas leak. Sanctions were not enough for the Anglo-Saxons. They moved on this sabotage. It is hard to believe, but it is a fact that they organized the blast on the Nord Stream international gas pipelines, which run along the bottom of the Baltic Sea. It is clear to everyone who benefits from this. So am I saying that there's no such thing as false flags? No. Am I saying that it's beyond the spy crap? I don't know how I need to say this. Is it beyond Putin to have bombed his own gas pipelines to frame somebody else, i.e., us. Everyone's like, well, why would he bomb it? He could just turn it off. They don't understand that the theater of the global political situation. So back to his speech he starts talking about Western imperialism. In the West began its colonial policy back in the Middle Ages, and they followed the slave trade and the genocide of the indigenous tribes of America and the plunder of India, of Africa, and the wars of England and France against China. What they did was hooking entire nations on drugs, deliberately exterminating entire ethnic groups for the sake of land and resources. They hunted people like animals. This is contrary to the very nature of man, truth, freedom, and justice. So as he's talking about the West, he starts talking about the nuclear precedent. The United States is the only country in the world that has twice used nuclear weapons, destroying the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and setting a precedent. Even today, they actually occupy Germany, Japan, and the Republic of Korea and other countries, and at the same time cynically call them allies of equal standing. Western morals. And now they have moved on entirely. This is the point. Well, I guess even the nuclear thing was probably the war, Dugan's war on modernity, but here, now they have moved on entirely to a radical denial of moral norms, religion, and family. The dictatorship of the Western elites is directed against all societies, including the people of the Western countries themselves. This is a challenge to all. This is a complete denial of humanity, the overthrow of faith and traditional values. Indeed, the suppression of freedom itself has taken on the features of a religion, outright Satanism. Do we really want here in our country, in Russia, instead of mom and dad, to have parent number 1 and parent number 2, number 3? Have they gone completely insane? Do we really want it drilled into our children in our schools that they are supposedly genders besides women and men? And children to be offered the chance to undergo sex change operations. We have a different future, our own future. So that's just a flavor from Al Jazeera of what Putin said. And, you know, he goes on and he brings up the precedent that the United States said with the nuclear weapons to end World War II. He goes on to say, hey, these guys have lost their moral compass, their ethics are fucked up. And then he goes on to say shit that people probably, if they wouldn't say out loud, probably agree with. Like, hey, you know, look at them, what they're doing to their fucking kids. They're going to screw their fucking kids up forever with this shit. So I'm going to go to the Hill now. Putin puts U.S. officials on edge with nuclear saber rattling. Sabers don't rattle, they go. U.S. officials are on edge over President Vladimir Putin's recent threat to use nuclear weapons ahead of his illegal and contested move to claim huge swaths of Ukrainian territory. Current and former U.S. officials said on Sunday that although there is nobody in Russia who could stop Putin from deploying nuclear weapons, such a move would guarantee a cataclysmic response from the U.S. and its NATO allies. To be clear, the guy who makes that decision, I mean, it's one man. There is no checks on Mr. Putin. Just as he made irresponsible decision to invade Ukraine, you know, now he could make another decision. That was Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who was talking to CNN's Fareed Zakira So probably no one saw that since it was on CNN. Austin added that he doesn't see anything right now to indicate that Putin has definitely made such a decision. Hold on to your hats. We're only 15 minutes in. Former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster on Sunday said that Putin is under extreme pressure after battlefield failures and domestic frustrations over a mobilization order that could send hundreds of thousands of reservists into the war. H.R. McMaster, as we know from the Battle of 73 Easting. Yes. So you can go and find those episodes in the featured topic link on Abracast.com. H.R. McMaster was one of the captains or lieutenants back then. He got out. He finally made it to be a general and got out, and he worked for Trump for a little bit. I think the message to Putin is if you use a nuclear weapon, it's a suicide weapon. And the response from NATO and the United States doesn't have to be nuclear, McMaster told Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan on CBS. Putin's move to annex the 4 regions of Ukraine on Friday came after he warned that Moscow would deploy its massive nuclear arsenal to protect Russian territory or its people. So there's a little bit of history that needs to be talked about here. I can't believe we're not talking about it. Like we have a problem where we get people to do stuff and we promise them to, we make promises to get them to do stuff and then we totally don't do it. And I know this is going to seem like I'm kind of using both sides of my face to say this, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, all these little parts of it that wound up becoming their own like little countries and city states and whatnot had nuclear weapons. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, we went in and we were like, look, just give us your nuclear weapons. Just let us destroy them, and then we'll protect you. If Russia or anyone ever moves against you, we'll take care of you. Big Daddy's got you. So maybe this is the reason that we're sending all this money to them. I don't know. But it seems like we're definitely, and you're like, yeah, well, why are you saying both ways? Like you don't like the war or whatever, you don't want to support the war or whatever, but you're saying that we're responsible to take care of it. And I guess my thing is like, look, I'm not a fucking politician, bro. I'm just looking at it unfold, and I can only tell you like my opinion on it. That shit is for politicians to figure out. My answer would be I am assuming that if a different person were in office, or if Afghanistan was handled differently, that we would not be Ukraine would not be in the situation it's in now. There's a reason that Putin waited for this moment to invade. So there's my fucking answer. Experts have said that the poorly trained reinforcements are unlikely to change the course of the war, and fear Putin could be increasingly dangerous if Russia continues to suffer costly and embarrassing losses. The Russian president is responding with only one quiver he has left, which is to threaten the use of nuclear weapons, McMaster said. The former CIA director and retired Army General David Petraeus said on Sunday that if Russia used the weapon, the U.S. would lead a fierce NATO response. So again, that's challenging. There's a giant problem with that. The alliance would take out every Russian conventional force that we could see and identify on the battlefield in Ukraine and also in Crimea, and every ship in the Black Sea. Keep that in mind. Put that on the back of your mind. Petraeus said on ABC this week. Putin is trying to cast this in any way that he can to appear threatening, to try to get Europe to crack. He thinks he can out-suffer Europe, if you will, Petraeus added. So there's a thing, like I used to really enjoy General Petraeus and Mattis, like all these guys, but you have to remember that when they get that general officer promotion, that's a political appointment. You don't get to be a general for passing a board. You know what I mean? Like it's a political appointment. So, that's why there's such things as called colonels' rebellions and this kind of stuff, is because they're like the last legitimate sort of non-political military person. You know what I'm saying. I hope I'm babbling. So back to it. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, in a recent interview, said that he has told Russian officials to stop the loose talk about nuclear weapons. And okay, well, I'm sure they'll pay attention, but they also warned of the lack of checks on Putin from within the Kremlin. Russia has got itself into a mess that it's in because there's no one on the system to effectively tell Putin he's doing the wrong thing. The Secretary of State told CBS 60 Minutes host Scott Pelley in an interview that aired last week, "It's very important that Moscow hear from us and know from us the consequences would be horrific," Blinken said. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said last week, the United States will respond decisively to any nuclear weapons use, and said that the U.S. has spelled out in great detail what that would mean in top-level talks with senior Russian officials. Let me say it plainly. If Russia crosses this line, there will be a catastrophic consequence for Russia, top national security aide has said. All right. Do you think that they're worried about that? You can just turn on YouTube or the TV and see Joe Biden like literally running away from reporters. Okay. So, this one, is in the Moscow Times, independent news from Mother Russia. This guy, Sergei Vakulenko. Shock and awe. Who attacked the Nord Stream pipelines? Western governments have not made formal findings of the responsibility for this week's sabotage attacks on 2 Russian underwater pipelines carrying natural gas to Europe. While all of the evidence is being carefully reviewed, it seems reasonable to expect that some of it will soon be declassified. In the meantime, NATO and the European Union and key figures like the International Energy Agency Director Faith Briol are not holding back about the identity of the culprit. Quote, "It is very obvious who is behind this issue," unquote, the leader said on September 29th. At the same time, Russian officials were unsurprisingly placing blame on the West and have convened the United Nations Security Council session to discuss the matter. There are aspects of this mystery that resemble an Agatha Christie novel, which is nearly everyone involved appears to have a motive or would benefit on its outcome. It's useful, therefore, even though as a thought experiment, to look at what we know and what we don't know about what happened and the all-important question of who stands to benefit. So I'm not reading this saying that we did this shit. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting question. And if I had to guess, I would guess that yes, we did this. We are led by incompetent people. We cannot strategize ourselves out of a paper bag at this point in time. I've already mentioned, look at what we did trying to get out of Afghanistan and there's still people fucked up over that. It's ironic that I think on the same weekend, HBO put out 2 documentaries, one on the Iranian hostage crisis and one on the pullout of Afghanistan. And both of them, it's like they did it totally unironically. And they're both interesting, some level of interesting if you're interested in that history. Where was I? Pressure drops were reported at both the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines. running underneath the Baltic Sea on September 26th. 3 separate leaks were recorded off the coast of Denmark and Sweden, a few dozen kilometers apart. Both lines of the Nordic Stream 1 pipeline were impacted, along with one line of the Nordic Stream 2. Reports from seismologists based in Denmark and Sweden suggest that sizable explosions on the order of 100 kilos of TNT occurred in both incidents. So if I do my quick combat engineering math, kilograms to pounds, 100 kilos equals 220.4623 pounds, which is it's a lot. That's a lot of TNT to be swimming to the bottom of the Baltic Ocean, times 3. Unlike an oil spill, gas leakage is relatively harmless for the surrounding area at the same time. It's like a giant fart. Some climate experts are warning that the amount of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas being released from the damaged pipelines, could have a significant impact on the climate change. According to initial estimates, a total of 500 million cubic meters of gas was lost, which is the equivalent of 8 million tons of carbon dioxide or whatever. Skip ahead here. A normal political and business environment, all 3 damaged sections could probably be repaired within a year by a single repair fleet. It's quite possible that the biggest problem would be not the subsea work itself, but pumping out the water from the 3 1,200 kilometer stretches of pipelines. Rock debris would also have to be cleared out lest it damage the inside of the pipeline once the flow is restored. Another concern would be the state of the inside polymer coating, which is not designed to withstand prolonged contact with seawater. The total bill might run into hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even billions, but it is a small fraction of Gazprom's annual budget. So they're not even mentioning what this is going to do to Western Europe this winter. I know you guys, they better run out and get some fucking space heaters and some fucking generators or something. I'll skip ahead here too. Nord Stream 2, however, was sanctioned. See, this is it. Was sanctioned by the United States, and the pipeline was completed solely by Russian ships. The pipeline was completed last year but never launched. Germany put an end to the project in February, 2 days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The repairs would require a work permit from the Danish government since it would be carried out in their territorial waters. Given the current political environment, it would probably be difficult to obtain such permission. Whatever. Is he going to give a shit about permission from, you know what I mean? There are provisions within the existing sanctions for a waiver to be issued if work is needed to prevent damage to the environment or national safety. Nord Stream 2 might apply on those grounds, but it is unlikely to be granted. Most likely any repairs will have to wait until the end of the war in Ukraine, if not longer. So I have another one here. Retired Pentagon advisor says the U.S. is most likely to destroy Nord Stream pipelines. Retired U.S. Army colonel. So here we go. Douglas McGregor, who is a Pentagon advisor, claimed that the United States is most likely the state actor that sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines. In doing so, the U.S. has isolated Germany and made certain that they will have a cold and dark winter. McGregor added that Britain probably also played a role, and that the attack was carried out to prevent Germany from bailing on the war in Ukraine. During an appearance on the Judging Freedom podcast, McGregor said process of elimination rules out Germany because they are dependent on the Nord Stream for their energy security, while it also served no benefit for the Russians to have sabotaged its own infrastructure. I mentioned a little while ago that no one seems to be talking about the possibility of a false flag sort of situation. Germany appeared to be ready to abandon the proxy war and remove sanctions on Russia so it could actually provide natural gas to its slaves this coming winter. I'm hesitant to say we know it must have been Washington. We can't say that because we just don't know, but it's very clear that we have foreclosed Berlin's options. Berlin was drifting away from this alliance. Chancellor Olaf Scholz said, I'm not sending any more equipment. I won't send any tanks. Now he's in a bind because the United States has simply robbed him of his option of bailing out. Who's going to supply him gas and oil and coal and everything else if he bails out? Where does he turn now? And remember, the Germans, who are facing terrible consequences at home, refuse to restart nuclear power plants, the former official said. Okay, one more. Real clear politics. Jeffrey Sachs, the rest of the world thinks the U.S. probably sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline, but it doesn't show up in our media. Bloomberg TV host pushed back against Columbia University economist Jeffrey Sachs on Monday when he suggested that the U.S. and Poland are probably behind the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. A lot of the world is watching these events in horror, Sachs says. They view this as a horrible clash between Russia and the U.S. They don't see this as we do in the media, as an unprovoked attack by Russia on Ukraine. Most of the world sees it the way we describe it. Most of the world is just terrified right now, frankly, he added. The European economy is getting hammered by the sudden cutoff of energy, and now to make it definitive, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. and Poland. That is speculation. Sachs says, I know it runs counter to our narrative. You're not allowed to say these things in the West, but the fact of the matter is, all over the world, when I talk to people, they think the U.S. did it. Even reporters on our papers that are involved tell me, of course the U.S. did it, but it doesn't show up in our media. Jeffrey Sachs, I was attacked in the Atlantic for being on the side of peace, and I confess I'm on the side of peace. I'm very worried that we're on the path of an escalation to nuclear war, nothing less than that. Russia feels that this war is at the core of its security interests. The United States insists that it will do anything to support Ukraine's defeat of Russia. Russia views this as a proxy war with the United States. Whatever one thinks about this, this is the plan of extraordinary, dangerous escalation. A lot of the world is watching these events in horror, and a lot of the world doesn't like this NATO expansion, which, as they interpret as the core of this. They want to see a compromise between the U.S. and Russia. In vote after vote, the United Nations basically, it has been the Western countries that have been voting for sanctions and denunciations and other actions, whereas most of the world, certainly most of the world counted by population, is on the sidelines. They view this as a horrible clash between Russia and the U.S. They don't see this as we do in our media as an unprovoked attack by Russia or on Ukraine. Anyone in the U.S. thinks, well, what else is it? But that is because the way our media has been reporting this. The conflict goes back a long time. It didn't start in February 24, 2022. In fact, the war itself started in 2014. This is what Putin called out during his speech, if you recall, not 2022. And even had the antecedents. Unbelievable to be hearing on one side that they will use nuclear weapons if they have to, while the other side says, you can't frighten us. Europe is in a very, very sharp economic downturn. The sharp decline in output and living standards also shows up as a rise in prices. But the main fact is that the European economy is getting hammered by the sudden cutoff of energy. Now, to make it definitive, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. Poland, that is speculation. So it seems like this article is just in some kind of time loop itself. It just keeps repeating the same sort of stuff over and over again. So there is, in the Federalist, on the Federalist, there is a piece, a foreign policy piece, that talks about how it's called "As Russia Threatens Nukes, the U.S. Has Limited Options." That's a nice gas mask. I need to get a gas mask. My gas mask is old as fuck. Oh, I gotta take a note. The U.S. and its allies are trying to decide whether Putin's nuclear threats are largely bluff and whether our warnings are taken seriously. Newsflash, they're not. The number of annual fatalities from war has dropped precipitously since the end of World War II, despite the number of actual conflicts having increased significantly. The unprecedented developments has been correctly linked to the formidable deterrent power of the nuclear forces of the United States and its allies, France and the United Kingdom, and a deterrent that may now be diminishing just as when the U.S. has achieved political consensus to begin a new round of necessary nuclear modernization. Since World War II, U.S. nuclear and conventional weapons have successfully deterred direct war between great powers. But just current strategic balance is now coming under great stress. See, Tony Stark doesn't know what he's talking about. And I think in the first Avengers movie, he was like a nuclear deterrent because that always works out just fine. And I was watching that, and I was like, it seems like it does kind of, but it's written by Joss Whedon, who not only is an idiot, but a leftist idiot. So one key strategic guardrail was the U.S. goal of exceeding the power of our adversaries, especially with nuclear deterrence. But as a retired U.S. Air Force General Garrett Harnack warned more than a decade ago, the post-Cold War decades-long failure by the U.S. to modernize, what he described as embarking on a holiday from history, has real-world consequences. One worrisome development was a former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev concluding last week that if Russia used nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the U.S. would be too scared to respond. So Medvedev was the guy. Remember when Obama was meeting with Medvedev, and they were mic'd. They were doing like a joint whatever, and at the end they stood up and their mics were still hot, and Obama was like, he told Medvedev, he was like, hey, he shakes his hand and he goes, hey, when you go back home, tell Vlad that I'll have more leeway to work with him after the election. Okay. During our holiday from history, 4 things happened. First, there has been what Admiral Charles Richard described as a breathtaking Chinese nuclear buildup, during which the U.S. policymakers insisted China's rise was, quote, peaceful, unquote. This remember Chinagate, where basically the Clintons were selling the Lippo group and all this, like all of our nuclear secrets. What was the guy's name? I can't remember. That's it. I'm not prepared. Second, Russia decreed in 1999 that it would build more usable, accurate, discriminate, and short-range nuclear weapons in pursuit of a strategy to threaten to escalate from conventional conflict to a nuclear level. This escalate to win strategy aims to keep the U.S. out of the fight altogether, a strategy that appears to be bearing fruit. Third, while the U.S. Strategic nuclear modernization is now robustly underway, our shorter range and smaller theater nuclear capability has previously been jettisoned and withered, and still remains vastly inferior to that of Russia and even China. The fourth, Russia invaded Ukraine in both 2014 and 2022, for which we should have been, but were not prepared. especially given the U.S. and the United Kingdom both pledged to support Ukraine as far back as 1994. I believe that's the that's the agreement that I was speaking about earlier. Like, hey, just give us your nuclear weapons. We'll take care. Big Daddy's got you. The U.S. mistakes have led to a number of further nuclear developments that are flashing red on the warning screens of our military commanders. The U.S. has witnessed the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been accompanied by an unprecedented number of explicit threats by Moscow to use nuclear weapons against the U.S. and its allies. Apparently, those have successfully deterred the U.S. from directly intervening militarily. Although the U.S. nuclear modernization is thankfully moving quickly forward, the actual deployments remain at least a half a decade away. While new theater forces such as submarine-launched cruise missiles, again, keep this little bit on the back of your mind with the ships at the Baltic Sea, will be ready later on this next decade. Adding further complications to the strategic environment, the combined China and Russian nuclear buildup calls into question the viability of the 2010 New START II arms agreement and the 50 warhead limited under which the U.S. must operate for the first time in more than 4 decades. The U.S. has seriously contemplated on whether to build back up beyond the New START ceilings. So what are our options? What then is the United States to do? Our options aren't great, but here they are. Our New START treaty force structure restricts the U.S. hedge, which we can add roughly an additional 1,500 sea and land-based missile warheads to our arsenal, or double what we have now. It would take 4 years to accomplish. Such force might not even match the new Chinese warheads based in 360 silos. As for building more accurate or lower yield nuclear warheads for theater systems, an explicit presidential finding is required that such a weapon is needed, and admittedly controversial decision that probably would be characterized by opponents as supporting a nuclear war fighting and not deterrence goal. The war fighting is bad, the deterrence is good, for former being characterized by using nuclear weapons to actually fight a war, while the latter is only a threat to retaliate. Much U.S. Conventional and nuclear modernizations will take place in the next decade. In the meantime, our enemies are not going to graciously wait around for us to get our act together. U.S. conventional weapons are having a positive effect in reducing Moscow's aggression against the Ukraine for now. But every assumed U.S. conventional military success turns to failure should Russian President Vladimir Putin use nuclear weapons against Ukraine and its allies. U.S. war games and tabletop exercises has confirmed the U.S. would, under the current military balance, fail to achieve a favorable outcome if nuclear weapons were introduced into the conflict by Russia. So there are a few unknowns to talk about. To summarize, the current geostrategic landscape does not favor the United States due to our force structure. We lack arms control leverage to get Russia to agree to a good deal, such as limiting or banning multiple warheads, a proposal Russia has previously rejected. And if a conflict goes nuclear with the first use of highly accurate, low-yield Russian weapons, this is when you hear them say strategic nukes. That's what it is, the low yield. The U.S. and its allies have limited options with which to respond, as are Europe-based gravity bombs and platforms from which they are launched have to fly through enemy territory to avoid air defense. Whether cyber and advanced conventional capabilities can fill in that gap is not fully known. We have no guarantee any nuclear conflict will remain at the conventional level where the U.S. has at least a good chance of stopping Russian aggression. For now, the U.S. and its allies are primarily trying to decide whether Putin's nuclear threats are largely bluff, and we are stuck not knowing whether our warnings to avoid nuclear escalations are taken seriously. I'm running real behind. We still have more shit to talk about. So I've been kind of hinting around to this one for a while here. This is the Washington Examiner by Ryan King. Dateline, October 3rd, 2022. So this is just a few days ago. Russian submarine with nuclear tsunami technology vanishes. One of Russia's nuclear-powered submarines, named the Belgorod, has reportedly vanished from its Arctic harbor, and Western countries fear it could be gearing up to test its advanced weapon systems. The Belgorod is believed to be armed with, quote, Poseidon, unquote, nuclear torpedoes that supposedly have the ability to traverse hundreds of miles underwater and include nuclear tsunamis near coastal regions, this Italian newspaper reported. This nuclear mega torpedo is unique in the history of the world. Submarine expert H.I. Sutton explained on his website Covert Shores, Poseidon is a completely new category of weapon. It will reshape naval planning in both Russia and the West, leading to new requirements and new counter weapons. NATO has warned its members that Belgorod has left its perch in the Arctic harbor. Per La Repubblica, Belgorod is believed to be one of the largest submarines in the world and has entered service back in July. The New York Post reported NATO officials reportedly believe it could be headed to the Kara Sea for testing. Formerly known as the K-329 Belgorod, the submarine has been described as the epitome of a new concept in warfare. Let's see. The largest fleet of spy submarines in the world. They're based in the Arctic. Meanwhile, like, that's the most super villain move, right? To park all your submarines in the Arctic. The news of Belgorod's disappearance comes amid heightened concern that the Kremlin is eyeing its nuclear weapons as it suffers setbacks in the Ukraine. Recent footage shared on a pro-Russian Telegram channel showed a train transporting advanced military gear that belongs to the 12th Main Directorate, which helps maintain Moscow's nuclear stockpile, the Daily Mail reported. Last month, Russian President Vladimir Putin sent much of the West into a frenzy when he vowed to defend the territorial integrity of our motherland by all the means at his disposal, remarks that were widely interpreted as a nuclear threat. The Kremlin has suffered a string of snags on the battlefield in neighboring Ukraine. Recently, Russian forces pulled back from a great eastern city of Lyman, located in the blah, blah, blah. During the signing ceremony, Putin said that the United States created a precedent for deploying nuclear weapons, which it did during World War II. Western officials, such as the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, have warned of consequences for Russia deploying nukes. Over the weekend, retired Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster's, again, see the episodes on the Battle of 73 Easting, summarized that Moscow could be on the precipice of really the collapse of the Russian army in Ukraine. So, like I said, I just kind of wanted to touch base. I'm not sure if I want the podcast to become, the history of the end of the world in real time, but sometimes it seems like that's what we're doing here. I had one more article pulled up, but basically it's just how the Army can't recruit anybody anymore. The Army falls at 25% short of its recruiting goal. It says here, the takeaway: frantic effort to make up the widely expected gap in a year when all the military service struggled in tight jobs market to find young people willing and fit to enlist. So that's it. This is the Abracast, and I'm John Towers. And just to close on a closing note, now is the time to, be the first sergeant for your house. Get some more beans, get a couple more bullets. Stock up on your Band-Aids. Like, these are the things that we can do logistically to Like I mentioned earlier, buy some fucking space heaters and a generator or two. God knows I have. So now's the time to be the first sergeant for your home and your loved ones. You know, get a little wiggle room in your stores, in your cupboards, and your junk drawers, and your first aid kits, and it's a smart move because you read through this shit and you never know what's happening. And I am literally going to go shop for a gas mask. The one I stole from the army when I got out can't. I mean, I guess it could still be good. I don't know, but I need to get it. I need to get a new one. So I'm gonna go start a fire in the backyard, pour a drink, cook. I'm gonna cook steaks tonight, and I'm gonna enjoy the quiet while it's here. And then I'll be shopping for a gas mask on my cell phone. All right. I'll see you guys in a few days. Please think about the first sergeant business. I want everyone, I don't want anything bad to happen to anybody, but you prepare. What is it? How does it go? You prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I guess that's where I'm at.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books at Abracast.com. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes, more bonus audio, additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Find the link to the Red Archive at Abracast.com.